I have a confession to make. My eyes are stupid. In fact, when it comes to color matching in composite images, they're idiot sandwiches. All right, welcome back. It's been a while, huh? Right? It was a really long 2-week break that I took. Anyway, so like I said in the intro, this video is going to be about how I work around my stupid eyeballs. And by that I mean, obviously it's not my eyeballs that are stupid. They actually have a PhD, so. No, it's my brain. My brain dumb. At least when it comes to color matching. It's such a slow process that I'm just kind of bad at. Anyway, years back, I was more into Photoshop before I was doing After Effects. And there was this company called Flern, had some really good tutorials on YouTube for just photography and Photoshop and stuff like that. Anyway, I actually purchased some of their paid for tutorials, and some of them come with these actions. And one of the actions was a full check, they called it. And what this is it breaks down the information in your scene by hue, saturation, and lightness. So the color, how saturated it is, and how bright everything is, or dark everything is. It changed everything. And, recently I was thinking about it, I'm like, I want to do that in After Effects. So this is what I came up with. All right, so as you can see, we have these 5 assets here. This is our original footage. We got our sky. We have our smoke simulation 1, smoke simulation 2. These were created in Blender. We have our little guy here, our little friend, Sheldon. You might recognize him from the demonic eyes tutorial that I did a little while back, last year. And of course, we have the shadow. Anyway, so we got our 5 assets. None of them are color corrected. As you can see, the sky is a little bit more blue compared to the purplish nature of this footage. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to create a new adjustment layer. And let's start off with separating the lightness from the hue and the saturation. So we're going to call this black and white. And we're going to add a tint. Now I'm using FX Console by Video Copilot. This isn't so much about the effects and all that. You can find the effects here by typing them in, and that's how I normally would do it. But this is just going to be so much faster for me to get through the actual concept of what we're trying to do, rather than, you get it, right? Anyway, so we got our tint here, and that's all we need to do. We have separated the saturation and the hue from the lightness, and leaving only the lightness. So what we can do is we can add a curves here to Mr. Sheldon. All right, so we can do the best that we can, given this footage. We can kind of match here. We're just kind of looking at the overall brightness and darkness. It's not quite all the way black, the darkest points. This footage was shot in like a log type thing, and I didn't actually do any color corrections. That looks about good. Yeah, that's our boy Sheldon. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to separate the saturation. Oh, Sheldon, no, go away. Oh no, we've summoned him. Sheldon. I'm recording audio. Yes, I know that you are in the episode. Yeah. Okay, where were we? Now that we're interrupted by our star of the show here. All right, so now we need to separate the saturation from everything else. And we're going to do that. We're going to add a new solid. We're going to make this red, just pure red. And we're going to call this hue. Under blending mode, if you don't see this, by the way, you can hit the toggle switches, modes. So under mode, we're going to set this to hue. So now what we're going to do is hit Command D, and we're just going to duplicate that. We're going to rename this to luminosity. Nailed it. And under the blending mode, we are going to change this to, can you guess what color? Nope, just kidding. Luminosity. All right, so now we need another layer here. We're going to go to adjustment layer. We're going to call this saturation. Now we're going to leave the blending mode at normal. We're going to add a hue saturation, and we're just going to turn this up. So now what we have here, what we're looking at is pretty much a map of how everything is saturated. So it goes from the more pure red it is, the more saturated it is. The more gray it is, the less saturated. Now, as you can see, Sheldon's actually pretty matched to the sky, but we don't want to match to the sky. We want to match to the ground because he's in the shadow on the ground. He's not in the sky. He's not a sky kitty. All right, so we're going to go to our Sheldon. I have no idea what the hell that was. Not a sky kitty. Okay, so we're going to go to our Sheldon here. We're going to add a hue saturation. And what we can do is just turn this down until he more closely matches his surroundings. Now, if we turn all these off, you can see he's getting there. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to turn off our hue, but leave our luminosity and saturation on. Whoa! Now we have separated the hue from everything else. That easy. Done already. So you can go into Sheldon, and you can either go into the master hue here and just kind of turn this till it kind of matches. I mean, he's not far off, technically. I mean, obviously, he's not going to be the same color as the concrete. He's not going to be the same color as the grass. I think something like that looks good. So now he matches a little bit better. Let's get that sky going. All right. Let's add a curves. Let's turn on our black and white. This is going to be a little different because the sky is always going to be brighter. But we can kind of like maybe give it a bit more contrast. Just a little bit more. Kind of match the darkness of the ground a little bit better, but always being just brighter. The sky is always going to be brighter than the ground. That's just how it works. All right, so let's move on to our saturation. Hue saturation. Probably turn this down just a little bit, you know. And let's move on to the color, because that's going to change a lot. As you can see, we need a more purplish hue rather than this blue hue. Let's see how this looks. Okay, that's a little too much. Maybe a little less saturated. So everything's matching just a little bit better. And of course, we can go into the smoke and all that and do the same thing. Smoke sim 1, set of curves. Turn on black and white. This could be made a little bit darker, but maybe turn on our luminosity in that. And let's go into our blue. Maybe turn up the blue just a little bit. So that way the smoke matches. And we can even just copy and paste this over to the other one. So anyway, the main point of this was to show you these guys right here. There's another thing we can add here. Let's go to new adjustment layer. We're gonna call this one. What are we calling it? Oh yeah, we're gonna call this threshold, and we're gonna add a threshold, and that's gonna be under stylize threshold. Boom. What we have going on here is if we set this to 0, everything's completely white. As we go up, you'll notice it's as things get brighter in the image, they turn more white, or black rather. So now we have this kind of, we can see our values of bright and darkness. All right, so this is for making sure things in your image, when you move from 0 to, completely black, that things go evenly, as if it's, located inside the shot. Now, if I go over here, like this, if I keep going, you might notice something strange starting to appear. You see these hard edges? Looks like a square. What that is now I've done this on purpose. So in this case, it's the alpha mat was turned up just a little bit. So the things that were supposed to be transparent aren't. So now, I don't really care for having these extra guys showing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn all these on. I'm going to hit Shift Command C, and I'm going to pre-compose these, and I'm going to call this color correction pocket knife. Yeah, because it's like a Swiss Army knife of things. You know, you get it. Now that I've done that, I've kind of lost my ability to turn these on and off and control them. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new adjustment layer, and we're going to call this pocket knife CTRLS controls. So we're going to add, what are we going to add? Yeah, we're going to add a checkbox control, and we need one for the black and white. We need one for the hue, for the luminosity and saturation, because you know what? They're always used together. All right. Yeah. And then one for the threshold. Yeah. I don't know if you noticed that, but I was just figuring things out on the spot. All right. So we got our black and white. We've got our hue. We've got luminosity / saturation. And then we have our threshold. Now we also need a control slider for the value of the threshold. So we're going to add a slider control. So now we're going to name our slider control. We're going to call this thresh value. How about that? To start off, we're going to lock this effects panel up so that it won't go away. All right, so now that we have this locked off, we're going to go into our CC pocket knife. We're going to select on our black and white layer, and we're going to hit T for transparency to bring up the opacity. Now we're going to alt-click on the stopwatch here. We're going to type if parentheses. Then we're going to take our pick whip. We're going to click on it, and we're going to drag it all the way up to our black and white, and we're going to make sure we connect it to the checkbox. And then we're going to type in equals 1, close that parentheses, 100, else 0. Let's turn these off real quick. Let's turn on our black and white. Oh yes, also what we need to do is we need to do the toggles and switches here to get to this little collapse transformations. And we need to set that. Boom, there we go. Now the effects will carry over. Because I mean, this tint is tinting whatever is beneath it, and there's nothing beneath it. But if we do collapse transformations, that means all this information is being calculated inside here. Right? Okay. So now that that's done, we can close that out. We can go to hue. Let's uncheck this. Thank you. We can go to our hue, hit T, alt-click on the stopwatch. Again, if. Going to pick whip to our hue checkbox. Equals 1, 100, else. Make sure else is not capitalized and also spelled correctly, else 0. What this is saying is that if this checkbox is checked on, then our opacity will be set to 100. And if it's turned off, it will just be 0. So it's an easy way of, turning layers off and on. Luminosity. Okay, what we can also do is I'm going to double tap U here. We're going to select our expression and we're going to copy it. go up to luminosity. We can close this back out, go up to luminosity, open up opacity, alt click, and then we can paste. Now, we can select all this between the first parentheses and the first equal sign. Take our pick whip and connect it to the checkbox. Now, we turn this on, make sure that it works, and it works. Now for this guy, we can actually just, let's copy it, hit T on our saturation, alt click, and just paste it. Because that one's going to be exactly the same. And of course, we can do the same to our threshold. Paste, select everything between that, and go to our threshold checkbox. There we go. Now let's turn all these layers on. Now we need our slider control. So if we hit E, we can get our effects to come up, and we have our threshold. And our level, we're going to alt click on that, and we're going to pick whip it to our slider of our threshold value. All right, so we're going to turn on our threshold. So technically the numbers only go from 0 to 1 on this slider. Anything after 1 is already higher than our threshold effect can do. So basically we need to access the numbers in between 0 and 1, and we can't do that by using the slider or even the arrow keys. And what I want to do is actually make this go from 0 to 100 being the highest value on the threshold. To solve this problem, all we have to really do is inside the expression for the threshold value, at the end, add a divided by 100. And then we have solved the problem. All right, so this is a lot to set up. One thing you can do is if you want to take all of your footage and stuff like that, all the assets, and just remove them from the project completely. And that way you can save it as a separate file as like a template. So that way when you open it up, you'll automatically have all these created. So all you have to do is add your footage, add your assets and stuff like that, and then start color correcting. All right, so that's my technique for getting around my dumb eyeballs. Hopefully you found this useful and you learned a lot. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.